Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Youngyo Kim. After ending its self-imposed moratorium and firing an intercontinental ballistic missile, North Korea is showing signs that it could resume nuclear tests. And now, the US government is closely watching North Korea for possible future provocations, while South Korean officials said North Korean activities are detected at its previously closed nuclear test site. Today, we'll discuss the possibility of North Korea resuming a nuclear test and what the US response will be. Joining me is Frank Jannuzi, President and CEO of the Mansfield Foundation. He previously served as Deputy Executive Director at Amnesty International USA. From 1997 to 2012, Mr. Jannuzi was Policy Director of the East Asian Pacific Affairs for the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Eric Brewer is also with me today. He is a Senior Director for NTI's Nuclear Materials Security Program. From 2017 to 2018, Mr. Brewer served as Director for Counterproliferation at the National Security Council, where he was responsible for coordinating U.S. policy to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. Welcome to the program. Really appreciate your time today.
Great to be here.
It's not only that the South Korean government officials are saying, but there's also a report written by a former UN panel of experts speculating North Korea is preparing for a nuclear test. Mr. Jannuzi, will North Korea proceed with its seventh round of nuclear test?
Most likely they will. I think that when nations, leaders tell us what they're going to do, oftentimes they mean it. And Kim Jong-un in his New Year's address made pretty clear the path of North Korea is to try to perfect their nuclear capabilities, to continue to modernize their nuclear forces, attempt to miniaturize their nuclear warheads to fit them on long-range missiles. And I think that there's no particular reason that we should believe that North Korea will be dissuaded by the current sanctions or political pressure from continuing to modernize and advance their nuclear forces. I think the real question for the United States at this juncture is not so much will they continue missile testing and nuclear testing, but what will be the U.S. and more importantly, perhaps the concerted international response to those tests.
I agree with Frank. I think the possibility of North Korea conducting another nuclear test is more of a question of when rather than if. Since January 2020 and multiple times since, Kim Jong-un has said that he's no longer bound by these self-imposed constraints on long-range missile launches and nuclear tests. Of course, now we've seen him abandon the constraint on ICBM tests. And so I think it's fair to say that eventually he will also abandon the constraint on a nuclear test and carry one out. And so the opportunities to prevent North Korea from moving forward are growing shorter by the day. So that's an unfortunate development as North Korea continues to make that progress.
Mm-hmm. If they do carry on with a nuclear test, does this mean that the North Korean regime lied when they said they destroyed its nuclear testing site at Punggye-ri in 2018?
Yeah, I wouldn't look at it from the standpoint of whether or not North Korea lied, right? I think, at the time, North Korea took steps to destroy some of the tunnel entrances and some of the tunnels. They also took steps to dismantle their satellite launch facility, but they did it deliberately in a way that made those steps reversible. We knew that those steps were reversible. And so I think, there was a lot of theatrics surrounding that, particularly at the nuclear test site. But the intent was, of course, to be able to go back to resuming those activities if North Korea ultimately decided to do so, which it seems like it has. And so I think, one important point to draw from that experience is that, whenever, there is an agreement with North Korea, be it, a short interim agreement or something longer about denuclearization, it's critical to have a shared understanding of the steps that North Korea will take as part of that and the specific actions it will take and make sure those actions are actually contributing meaningfully to the goals of denuclearization or whatever the objective may be. And then also having a way to verify those steps through a team of international inspectors on the ground that can actually have access to these sites to verify that the steps are having the impact that they're intended to have.
Frank, I want to underscore the point that it's less about North Korea lying and more about the fact that at various stages of the efforts to engage North Korea on denuclearization and peace efforts, whether it's the 1994 agreed framework or the much celebrated demolition of the cooling tower at the Yongbyon nuclear power facility, or the destruction of tunnel entrances at Pyongyang-ri, at various points along the pathway, there have been opportunities either to build on modest progress toward the goal of denuclearization, or to fail to capitalize on those moments and to see North Korea either reverse course or backslide or continue clandestine operations to pursue their nuclear capabilities. And I think that the destruction of the tunnel entrances on Pyongyang-ri is a classic example of this. Basically, nothing about the North Korean nuclear program is irreversible. One of the most horrific damages done to the U.S. foreign policy language about North Korea was this pursuit of CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. There's no such thing as irreversible denuclearization. All of that depends upon the political will of the North Korean leadership to work with the international community to abandon their nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm. There is some analysis from South Korea that North Korea is planning to test its miniaturized nuclear warheads with an aim to develop capability to attack different U.S. cities at the same time. Mr. Brewer, what do you make of this? Is there anything else North Korea needs to test in its nuclear capability?
I think certainly testing new warhead designs that could be useful for the tactical nuclear weapon systems that Kim has said he wants to develop, which those systems are generally, shorter range, lower yield than some of the other systems. So I think that could be incredibly advantageous and perhaps even necessary as testing that new design, as well as testing designs for missiles that may be smaller and more compact, so that they can fit multiple warheads inside of a missile, which is obviously one of their goals. And one thing that they've been making progress on, because this is, an important way and an important step to be able to either evade or defeat U.S. missile defense systems. And, we don't have a lot of information on North Korean nuclear weapons design. We can make some conjectures about the types of tests they've carried out to date. So it is a bit difficult to speculate on this issue. I would say, when you look back to 2018, right, when Kim Jong-un declared that his nuclear arsenal was complete, that was part a tactic as part of the negotiation phase during that period, but part of it was not. And I think, if you think about how could he make that statement now and yet continue to need these capabilities, building a nuclear arsenal is akin to writing a book for authors out there. At that point in 2018, Kim he'd finished the book, right? He'd finished the rough draft of that book. And what we've seen since is editing and revising and making that book a lot better through the development of systems that are more accurate, more maneuverable, more reliable, and capable of addressing a range of potential conflict scenarios and crisis scenarios on the peninsula.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Jannuzi, what's your take on these assessments from South Korea?
Well, I think that we've seen North Korea, as Eric pointed out correctly, we've seen them essentially flesh out the chapters of this book. They're working on a sea launch capability. They're working on road mobile missiles with longer ranges. The Hwasong 17 and 15 tests that we've observed in the last few weeks demonstrate a more survivable weapon system because it's road mobile with longer range than what they had tested in the past. And I think that what we're going to continue to see is incremental improvements, both in the reliability and the survivability of these weapon systems. I think if we can take anything encouraging at all from North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons, it's to try to understand the limitations of what this weapons capability provides to the North Korean leadership in terms of the ability to coerce or to compel the international community to somehow provide to the North what they're looking for. I think at its core, the North Korean nuclear capability is about guaranteeing the security of the DPRK. I think the part of it that worries us the most is both the coercive element with respect to both South Korea and the United States, but also the risk of proliferation, which I think is Eric's wheelhouse. But I mean, the North Korean government has exported nuclear capabilities in the past to Syria. and there's no guarantee that they will not do so in the future. So I think these are the two dimensions of the problem that are most concerning to me.
Mm-hmm. After the summit with Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong, President Joe Biden called on North Korea to stop its ballistic missile launches and return to talks. Mr. Brewer, how can the U.S. bring North Korea back to the talks? Or what will make North Korea come to the table on its own?
You know, it's not exactly a fun answer, but there might not be a whole lot we can do right now. Kim Jong-un has determined it's not in North Korea's interest to attend talks. It's not in his interest to negotiate. You know, the United States has essentially said the equivalent of we're willing to meet anytime, anywhere with North Korea to discuss a range of issues and discuss denuclearization. And so I do think that if a negotiation is going to take place, it's probably going to occur when North Korea believes that it can actually acquire some level of relief from international pressure, probably in the form of sanctions relief from the United States, without requiring it to compromise on key elements of its nuclear program. You know, denuclearization is, you know, it's a goal that's not going to happen overnight. It's a long-term aspiration. And so I think, you know, we may be better served in the interim by focusing on arms control or risk reduction measures that can appreciably reduce the threat posed by North Korea's nuclear weapons, reduce the chances of nuclear use, while we work towards that long-term goal of denuclearization. My sense is that the administration is open to these types of approaches, but I don't think it's putting anything concrete on the table. All that said, if things do change and North Korea does decide to negotiate, I think we need to be ready for that.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Jannuzi, is North Korea willing to talk?
I think under the right circumstances, they might be. But I think, as Eric rightly points out, and something that Mike Mansfield taught me, the United States cannot tell North Korea where its interests lie. Their leadership, their government will determine where North Korean interests lie. And right now, they've clearly made that decision, that their interests lie in developing a nuclear capability to help ensure their security. And the equation here is really pretty straightforward. If the United States and its allies wish for North Korea to abandon their nuclear weapons, there needs to be a substitute of equal credibility and reliability for North Korea to ensure the security of the North Korean state. And no such substitute exists at the moment. I think trying to find that substitute, including the kinds of positive security assurances that the Obama administration and the Trump administration and even the Biden administration, I think, is prepared to offer, has been the story of North Korea-U.S. diplomacy over the last 20 years. But we have not cracked the code. I was with Kim Dae-gwan in 2003 summer, just after North Korea had finished reprocessing 8,000 spent fuel rods for the material for their nuclear weapons program. And I'll never forget what he said to my Republican colleague and I in Pyongyang. He said, you know, you two, addressing myself and Keith Luce from Senator Lugar's staff, you two need to stop trying so hard to prevent North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. And you need to put your heads together and start thinking about how you're going to live with a nuclear-armed North Korea. We've been living with a nuclear-armed North Korea for the last 17 years. So I think what Eric is suggesting is a rather pragmatic, I mean, some would call it defeatist, but I think it's pragmatic approach to this problem, which is we need to learn how to manage the North Korean threat until such time as we are in a better position diplomatically to try to affect change in their nuclear posture. And we're not there now.
Yeah, if I could just respond really quickly to that. I mean, you know, I'm not that frank in suggestions. I'm not quite sure it's defeatist, right? Because I do think, you know, it's pragmatic, it's realistic, it's sort of, you know, tackling the problem in a way that North Korea might be amenable to and would have real tangible benefits. I think, too, if successful, for reducing the threat that North Korea poses to the United States and its allies in the region. And I don't think it necessarily means that you have to take your eye off of denuclearization, right? That can and should remain the long-term goal. But it's more about trying to find the wins in the near term rather than just waiting.
Yeah, I agree with Eric on this point. It's not that I would characterize it as defeatist at all. I think it's really a realistic, pragmatic approach, which keeps the door open, as Eric says, to the possibility of denuclearization. I just think we need to be brutally realistic about the likelihood that North Korea is going to move in that direction anytime soon. What I would like to see out of the Biden administration is a little bit more creativity and a higher profile on this issue. I think that North Korea's behavior could be constrained if we were successful in convincing them to rejoin a diplomatic initiative, even if that initiative does little better than tread water for a while. I think that there's value to be found in trying to constrain North Korea's behavior, slow down the pace of their nuclear and missile testing, and explore the potential for diplomatic openings.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Jannuzi, you just mentioned about maybe what the Biden administration need is creativity, but the Republicans, they were saying that the Biden administration is not doing enough and they should be more stern in response to the North Korea. What do you say to that?
Well, I'm not sure that I could say it on air. But basically, I think the Republican criticism of Biden not being tough enough is not credible. For 3 years, the Trump administration coddled Kim Jong-un, allowing him to test missiles without response, allowing him to flout all of the UN Security Council resolutions, while the former guy sent love letters back and forth to Pyongyang. So I think it's just pure political opportunism at this point by Biden's critics.
Mr. Brewer, what's your thought? Is Biden administration doing enough?
So, looking back, I think, Frank just made a comparison and talked a little bit about the Trump administration. One thing that I think is true now, I mean, you're not adding more sanctions now or adding pressure now is not going to, I think, appreciably change the calculus in the near term, right? Looking back at the summits that took place under the Trump administration, the Trump administration gets a lot of criticism for the maximum pressure campaign and some of Trump's rhetoric during that time. And certainly I think criticism of that rhetoric is fairly well deserved. It wasn't helpful. But I do think actually the area where the Trump administration failed was in the diplomatic front, right? They did not use those summits with North Korea very well. I don't think the president was, he was just not, I don't think, capable of quite frankly, taking the position that the United States had found itself in with North Korea and really translating that into any good, achievable diplomatic outcomes. Because I think it did, during that phase, add a significant amount of pressure on North Korea. But I say all of this because, the offer that Kim put on the table in Hanoi, basically trading away shutting down Yongbyon and some other facilities that are important, albeit not going to stop fissile material production altogether, in return for some very, very significant sanctions relief. It's essentially all of the sectoral sanctions that were put in place under the beginning of the end of the Obama administration and added to under Trump. And the United States walked away from that. And I say all that because I think that has influenced Kim Jong-un's calculus. And I think his asking price now under any future negotiations is going to be much higher. And so I think we have to take that into account. The Biden administration has to take that into account as it approaches dialogue with Kim. So right now, the best solution may be to continue to be patient while we await that opportunity for dialogue.
Mm-hmm. And my last question for today. There was some controversy over North Korea claiming the latest ICBM test was Hwasong-17. And the South Korean military estimated it wasn't Hwasong-17, it was actually Hwasong-15. And that North Korea is trying to deceive the audience. And North Korea released a Hollywood-like movie starring the leader Kim Jong-un. Mr. Brewer, why are they doing this, and how should we take this?
Yeah, like you said, it seems that the March 16th test was actually a failed Hwasong-17, which is this monster liquid-fueled missile capable of housing multiple warheads. And then the March 24th test, which North Korea claimed was the Hwasong-17, was actually the Hwasong-15, which was still an ICBM that was last tested in 2017, and they just sort of reappropriated the footage. Right? I mean, I think the first obvious answer why they did this is to cover up the failure. I think the other answer as to why they made this video in the way that they did, and the emphasis that they've placed on this system is because of the capability of this ICBM to carry multiple warheads. And this is really an important development, an important signal when it comes to being able to defeat U.S. missile defenses. I think we should highlight that the United States has consistently said that its missile defense capability is capable of defending against North Korea threats. And it's designed and updated and intended to be capable of defending against those threats. So by demonstrating the capability to have this monster missile capable of having multiple warheads or decoys or other types of capabilities, the North Koreans are sending a strong signal to the United States that, when it comes to relying on missile defense, your days are numbered.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Jannuzi, is North Korea sending signals to the United States?
North Korea's behavior with respect to missiles as well as nuclear testing serves multiple purposes. And there's the technical side, advancing their capabilities, modernizing, moving toward multiple independently targetable reentry vehicles that they could assemble on a road mobile ICBM, and that's important. There's also a domestic political component, which you saw with that theater. It has both a domestic and an international audience. The prestige of this regime, the success of the Kim dynasty at the helm of North Korea is linked to their development of nuclear weapons. And it also has a north-south dimension. So there's a point of pride on the peninsula. South Korea has its own space launch program. North Korea is in competition with the South, if you will, for space bragging rights on the peninsula. So all three aspects of this, signaling to Washington, a domestic audience to the South, and also, I would add that maybe a fourth dimension, that technical advance. All of these are in play. And we make a mistake if we assume that it's always about us. Not everything's about signaling to Washington. There are multiple audiences here.
The United Nations Human Rights Council has just adopted a resolution condemning North Korea's human rights abuses for the 20th consecutive year. South Korea's Moon administration, which has just 1 month left in office, has not co-sponsored the resolution for 4 straight years, citing inter-Korean peace efforts. Mr. Jannuzi and Mr. Brewer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kim.
And that does it for this week's Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis.